The Galactic Empire stretched across 1,000 stars. For 3,000 years it had been ruled by the Dragon Emperors. These were not regular beings. They had golden scales that shined like metal in sunlight. Their eyes held the wisdom of ages. When they spoke, everyone listened. When they commanded, everyone obeyed. Emperor Kale Dravonis was the current ruler. He had sat on the throne for 200 years. People across the galaxy knew his name and feared it. He was fair but harsh. Those who broke his laws paid dearly for it. Thieves rarely survived their punishment. Traitors were executed without mercy. The empire was orderly, peaceful, and prosperous under his rule. On a small colony world called New Haven, life was different from the grand palaces of the capital. In the lower districts of the main city, people worked hard just to survive. The buildings were old and dirty. The air smelled of engine fuel and cooking oil. Workers walked the streets with tired faces, heading to factories and warehouses where they spent long hours for little pay. The Blue Star Diner sat on a corner in this district. It was a small place with worn tables and flickering lights. The owner was a man named Dale Price. He was short and thick around the middle with a red face and mean eyes. Dale ran his business like he was squeezing water from a stone. He paid his workers as little as the law allowed. He made them work long hours. He gave them no benefits, no sick days, no respect. Kate Morris worked at the diner. She was 23 years old but looked older. Her face was thin, too thin. Dark circles hung under her blue eyes. Her hands shook slightly when she carried plates. She had come to New Haven 2 years ago with big dreams. She wanted to go to university. She wanted to study medicine. She wanted to make something of herself. But life had other plans. Her family back on Earth needed money. Her little brother Danny was sick with a terrible disease. The medicine cost more than her parents could ever afford. So Kate worked. She worked double shifts at the diner. She worked nights loading cargo at the spaceport. She slept 4 hours if she was lucky. She ate 1 meal a day, sometimes less. Every credit she earned went into an account that she sent home to her family. The diner was nearly empty on this particular evening. A few workers sat at tables, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. Kate moved between them like a ghost. She took orders. She brought food. She cleaned tables. Her body moved automatically while her mind was somewhere else, probably thinking about her brother or counting the hours until her next shift ended. Emperor Kale walked into the diner just before closing time. Nobody recognized him. He wore a disguise that made him look like a regular human businessman. The hologram covered his scales and changed his face. He did this sometimes, traveling to different worlds to see how his empire really worked. The governors and officials always put on shows when they knew he was coming. But when he traveled in secret, he saw the truth. He chose a table in the corner and sat down. Kate approached with a tired smile that did not reach her eyes. She handed him a menu and asked what he wanted. Her voice was quiet and professional. Kale ordered a simple meal and watched her walk away. His senses were sharp even through the disguise. He noticed things that others missed. He saw how carefully she moved, like every step took effort. He saw how her uniform hung loose on her frame. He saw the way she kept one hand pressed to her side, probably where her stomach hurt from hunger. These were things he had seen before in war zones and disaster areas. But this was supposed to be a peaceful colony world in the heart of his empire. Kate brought his food and set it down without meeting his eyes. As she turned to leave, Kale watched her move to a nearby table. A couple had just left. Their plates still had food on them. Bread rolls sat untouched in a basket. Kate looked around quickly, checking if anyone was watching. Then she did something that changed everything. She took the bread rolls and wrapped them in a napkin. Her movements were fast and practiced. She slipped the small bundle into her apron pocket. It was over in seconds. Then she picked up the plates and headed toward the kitchen. But she had made one mistake. She had not noticed that Kale was watching. And Kale had seen everything. Their eyes met for just a moment.
Kate froze.
The color drained from her face. She saw in his expression that he knew what she had done. Panic flashed across her features. She quickly looked away and hurried toward the kitchen, walking faster than before. Kale sat back in his chair. His first thought was anger. Theft was theft. The law was clear. It did not matter if you stole a credit or 1,000,000 credits. Breaking the law meant punishment. He had built his empire on order and rules. If people could break small laws without consequence, soon they would break bigger ones. But something made him pause. He had ruled for 2 centuries. He had seen every kind of criminal. He knew the look of greed. He knew the look of malice. But what he had seen on Kate's face was neither of those things. It was fear. It was desperation. It was the look of someone who had no other choice. Cale ate his meal slowly. He watched the diner and its few customers. He watched Dale Price come out of the kitchen and yell at Kate for moving too slowly. The owner's voice was loud and cruel. He wore an expensive watch on his wrist. His clothes were new and clean. His belly showed he never missed a meal. The contrast was striking. The owner grew fat while his employees starved. When Kate brought the bill, she would not look at him. Her hands trembled as she set the small tablet on his table. She started to walk away quickly, but Kyle spoke. His voice was quiet, but it stopped her like a wall. She turned slowly, her face pale. Cale looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked a simple question. The bread you took, it would have been thrown away anyway, would it not? Kate's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled. Please, she whispered. Please do not tell Mr. Price I need this job. I will put it back. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Cale studied her face. He saw genuine terror there. This was not someone who made a habit of stealing. This was someone who was drowning and had grabbed for anything to stay afloat. He asked another question. When did you last have a proper meal? The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, confused. I eat, she said defensively. That was not what I asked, Cale replied. Kate looked down at her feet. 3 days ago, she whispered. But my brother needed his medicine. The bread, it is just going to be thrown away. I was not stealing from customers. Just the leftovers. Just the food that nobody wanted. Something shifted in Cale's chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling. In 200 years of rule, he had made countless decisions. He had ordered executions. He had declared wars. He had shaped the fate of billions. But he had done it all from his throne, seeing numbers and reports instead of faces and names. Now he was seeing both, and what he saw disturbed him deeply. What is your name? He asked. Kate Morris, sir. Tell me about your brother, Kate. Kate stood frozen for a moment. Nobody had asked her about Danny in a long time. Most people did not care about the problems of a diner waitress. But something in this stranger's voice made her want to talk. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was just the fact that someone was actually listening. She told him everything. The words came out in a rush like water breaking through a dam. She told him about her family back on Earth. Her parents worked in factories. They were good people who had never asked for much from life. They had 2 children and loved them both with everything they had. Then Danny got sick. He was only 15 years old. The doctors said he had something called Keller's syndrome. It was a genetic disease that attacked the nervous system. Without treatment, patients lost the ability to walk within a year. Then they lost the ability to move their arms. Then they could not breathe on their own. Most died within 5 years of the first symptoms, but there was a cure. Gene therapy could fix the problem completely. Patients who received the treatment went on to live normal, healthy lives. The only problem was the cost. The full treatment required over 1 million credits. For a working-class family, it might as well have been $1 billion. Kate's parents had tried everything. They sold their house and moved into a tiny apartment. They sold their car. They sold everything they owned that had any value. They took out loans they would never be able to repay. But it was not enough. Not even close, so Kate had dropped out of university. She came to New Haven because jobs paid slightly better on the colony worlds. She worked every hour she could. She sent home almost every credit she earned. But the medicine was so expensive. Danny needed treatments every month just to slow the disease down. The money disappeared as fast as she could earn it. The doctors say he has maybe 2 years without the full treatment, Kate said. Her voice was hollow, empty of emotion. With the gene therapy, he could live a normal life. But we will never have that kind of money. Never. Cale listened without interrupting. His face showed nothing, but inside his mind was racing. He had established medical assistance programs centuries ago. The Empire was supposed to help citizens in exactly these situations. There should be no reason for a young woman to work herself to death trying to save her brother. Why not apply for Imperial medical assistance, he asked. The Empire has programs for cases like this, Kate laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. I tried, she said. We all tried. Do you know what they told us? They said the waiting list is 5 years long. 5 years. Danny does not have 5 years. They have some algorithm that decides who gets help first. Somehow, the people with money and connections always seem to move to the front of the line. People like us just wait and watch our family members die. This information struck Cale like a physical blow. He had created those programs himself. They were supposed to be fair and efficient. They were supposed to help people based on need, not on wealth or influence. What had happened to them? How many hours do you work each week, he asked. Kate thought for a moment. About 80 hours here at the diner, she said. Sometimes 90. Then I have a night job at the cargo docks when I can get it. Maybe another 20 hours there. And Mr. Price pays you minimum wage. It was not really a question, but Kate nodded anyway. Cale did the math in his head. Even at those hours, after rent and basic expenses, she would have almost nothing left. No wonder she was starving. She was literally working herself to death, and it still was not enough. Before he could respond, Dale Price came storming out of the kitchen. His face was red and angry. "Morris," he shouted, "stop chatting with customers and finish your closing duties. This is not a social club." Kate jumped like she had been hit. "Yes, sir," she said quickly. "Sorry, sir." She turned to leave, fear written across her face. "Actually," Cale said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife, "I have some questions for you, Mr. Price." Dale turned toward him, irritation clear on his face. "The diner is closed," he said rudely. "You need to leave." Cale stood up. Even in his human disguise, there was something about him that commanded attention. Something ancient and powerful radiated from him despite the hologram. "Sit down," he said quietly. There was steel in those two words. There was authority that came from centuries of absolute rule. Dale found himself sitting in a chair before he even realized he had moved. Some part of his brain recognized that this was not a man to argue with. "Tell me about your employment practices," Cale said. "Minimum wage. Maximum hours. No benefits. Is that correct?" Dale's face grew defensive. "That is perfectly legal," he blustered. "I run a business, not a charity. I follow all the laws, and the food that gets thrown away at the end of each shift," Cale continued. "You destroy it rather than let your employees take it home." "Health regulations," Dale said quickly. "Cannot have people getting sick from old food and then suing me, even though your employees are going hungry while you destroy perfectly good food." Dale's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Some kind of labor inspector?" "I know my rights. Everything I do is legal, and that was the problem." Cale realized it in that moment. Dale Price was correct. Technically, legally, he was following all the rules. The minimum wage laws allowed him to pay poverty wages. The labor laws allowed him to work people for endless hours. The regulations gave him cover to destroy food rather than feed his starving staff. The laws were being followed, but justice was being violated. Cale had seen enough. He reached up and deactivated his holographic disguise. The image flickered and vanished like smoke. In its place stood a being of golden scales and ancient power. His eyes blazed with inner fire. His presence filled the small diner like a physical force. Dale Price's face went white as snow. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His entire body began to shake. Kate simply stared. She did not understand what was happening. One moment there had been a human businessman. Now there was a dragon standing in the diner. Her tired brain could not process it. "I am Cale Dravonis," the Emperor said quietly, "and I have seen enough." Dale fell to his knees. "Your Imperial Majesty," he gasped. "I had no idea. Please. I have done nothing wrong. Everything is legal. I swear." "That," Cale said coldly, "is exactly the problem." He turned to Kate, who was still frozen in shock. "Do not be afraid," he told her gently. "You are not in trouble, but I stole," Kate whispered. "I broke the law." "No," Cale said firmly. "The law broke you." "There is a difference." He pulled out a communication device and made several calls. Within minutes, Imperial agents began arriving at the diner. They wore the black uniforms of the Palace Guard. They moved with military precision. Some stationed themselves around Dale Price. Others approached Kate with medical equipment. "When did you last see a doctor?" one of them asked her kindly. Kate could not remember. Years, maybe. They scanned her with handheld devices. Their faces grew grim as they read the results. "Severe malnutrition," one reported. "Vitamin deficiencies. Early signs of organ stress. She needs immediate treatment. See to it," Cale ordered. Then he turned back to Dale. "You will triple the wages of all your employees effective immediately. You will provide full medical benefits. You will allow your staff to take home any unsold food. Do you understand? Dale nodded frantically. Yes, Your Majesty, of course. Whatever you command. Cale was not finished. Kate Morris, he said formally. I am authorizing an emergency medical grant for your brother. He will receive the full gene therapy treatment starting tomorrow. All costs will be paid by the Imperial Treasury. Kate's legs gave out. Two of the agents caught her before she hit the floor. Why, she sobbed. Why would you do this? Because it is right. Cale said simply, and because you have shown me something I needed to see. He looked around the shabby diner with its worn furniture and flickering lights. This, he thought, was the real empire. Not the grand palaces and gleaming starships. This was where his citizens actually lived, and he had been blind to it for far too long. Cale did not leave New Haven the next day, or the day after that. He stayed on the colony world for 2 full weeks. His sudden appearance had thrown the local government into chaos. The planetary governor rushed to the capital city, sweating and nervous. Officials scrambled to prepare presentations and reports. Everyone wanted to show the emperor that things were running smoothly. But Kyle was not interested in presentations. He wanted to see the truth. He sent away the governor and his assistants. Instead, he walked the streets himself, sometimes in disguise, sometimes openly. He visited factories and warehouses. He went to schools and hospitals. He talked to workers and families. And everywhere he went, he found the same problems that Kate had faced. People worked long hours for little pay. Parents struggled to feed their children. The sick waited months or years for medical care. Housing cost so much that families lived in tiny apartments, packed together like cargo. Food was thrown away while people went hungry. The empire was wealthy beyond measure, but that wealth never seemed to reach the people who needed it most. Kyle kept detailed notes. He had his agents compile data and statistics. The numbers were damning. Wealth inequality had grown steadily worse over the past century. The social programs he had established long ago had been weakened by bureaucracy and corruption. The laws meant to protect workers had been twisted to favor employers instead. On the 5th day of his visit, Cale went to check on Kate. She was in a medical facility, receiving treatment for her malnutrition. The doctor said she would recover fully, but it would take time. Her body had been starved for so long that it needed to slowly learn how to process food again. She was sitting up in bed when he arrived, looking much better already. There was color in her cheeks. Her eyes were clearer. She tried to stand when she saw him, but he waved her back down. How do you feel? He asked. Better, she said quietly. The doctors say I should be able to leave in a few days. She paused, then added, My brother started his treatment yesterday. My mother called me. She was crying. She said Danny smiled for the first time in months. Good, Cale said. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed. I need to ask you something, Kate, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded nervously. Do you think your situation is unusual? He asked. Or are there others like you? Kate laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your Majesty, she said, everyone I know is like me. Everyone in the lower districts. We all work multiple jobs. We all send money to family members who need medicine or food or housing. We all skip meals to make the credits stretch further. That is just life for regular people. But it should not be, Cale said quietly. That is not what I built this empire to be. Maybe not, Kate said carefully, but that is what it has become. She hesitated, then continued. The laws say employers have to pay minimum wage, but that wage was set 200 years ago. Prices have gone up, but the wage has stayed the same. The laws say everyone deserves medical care, but the waiting lists are so long that people die before getting help. The laws look good on paper, but in reality they do not work. Cale absorbed this. She was right, of course. He had been so focused on running an empire, on managing wars and trade routes and diplomatic relations, that he had stopped paying attention to how his laws actually affected individual lives. If you could change one thing, he asked, what would it be? Kate thought about this for a long moment. Just one thing, she finally said. I would make the people who write the laws live under them first. Let the bureaucrats try surviving on minimum wage for a year. Let them wait in line at a public hospital. Let them try to feed a family on what regular people earn. Then maybe they would understand what their laws actually do. Cale smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just learned a hard truth. You are right, he said. We need people who understand these problems. People who have lived them. He looked at her intently. "I want to offer you a job, Kate Morris." She blinked in surprise. "A job? But I already have a job." "At the diner, not anymore," Cale said. "Dale Price is no longer the owner of the Blue Star Diner. I have transferred ownership to his employees. They run it as a cooperative now. As for you, I want you to come work for me. On my personal staff." Kate stared at him like he had just suggested she fly to the nearest star. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, "I am not qualified for that. I never finished university. I have no experience in government. I do not even know what your staff does." "You have something more valuable than qualifications," Cale told her. "You have perspective. You have lived the life that most of my subjects live. You understand problems that my educated bureaucrats cannot even see. That is what I need." "But," Kate protested weakly. "I am not asking," Cale said gently. "I am telling you. When you are well enough to travel, you will come to the capital world. You will work with my Office of Social Welfare. You will help me fix what is broken, and you will be paid well enough that you never have to steal bread again." Kate's eyes filled with tears. She did not trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Kyle stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing," he said. "I need you to make me a list. Names of people you know who are in situations like yours was. Workers who are struggling. Families who need help. People who understand what life is really like in the Empire. I am going to need more advisors like you." Over the next week, Kate compiled the list. She reached out to former co-workers and neighbors. She contacted people she had met during her various jobs. The list grew longer and longer. Each name represented someone who was working hard but barely surviving. Someone who had been failed by the system that was supposed to protect them. Meanwhile, Cale called an emergency meeting of the Imperial Council. The meeting was held via holographic projection, with governors and high officials from across the Empire appearing as life-sized images around a great circular table. Many of them looked nervous. Emergency meetings usually meant someone was in trouble. Cale did not waste time with pleasantries. "We have a crisis," he announced. "Not a military crisis, not an economic crisis. A moral crisis." He told them about Kate and the Blue Star Diner. He showed them the data his agents had collected. He described what he had seen during his 2 weeks on New Haven. The room grew very quiet as he spoke. "The Empire exists to serve its citizens," Cale said, his voice hard. "We seem to have forgotten that. Our laws protect the wealthy and punish the poor. Our systems create poverty while producing massive wealth. We have built a civilization where a young woman can work 100 hours a week and still starve. This is not acceptable." Some governors nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked angry, calculating how these changes might affect their own positions and profits. "Starting now, things change," Cale continued. "I am issuing a series of imperial decrees. Minimum wage will be updated to reflect actual living costs. Medical waitlists will be restructured and expanded. Labor protections will be strengthened. Wealth taxes on the highest earners will increase to fund these programs. Every world in the Empire will comply. Is that understood?" There were murmurs of assent around the table. Nobody dared to openly object when the Emperor spoke in that tone of voice. But Cale knew that decrees alone would not be enough. Laws could be written and rewritten, but changing an entire culture required something more. It required people who understood the problems from personal experience. People who could not be fooled by bureaucratic language and official reports. That was why he needed Kate Morris and others like her. They would be his eyes and ears. They would tell him when the bureaucrats were lying or the governors were cheating. They would keep him honest and keep the Empire focused on what really mattered. The Empire was about to change. And this time the change would come from the bottom up instead of the top down. 3 weeks after the incident at the diner, Kate Morris arrived at the Imperial capital. She had never left New Haven before that trip. Now she stood on a world that was the center of galactic civilization. The city stretched as far as she could see, towers of crystal and metal reaching toward the sky. Flying vehicles moved between the buildings like schools of fish. The air smelled clean and fresh, nothing like the industrial stink of the colony world. The Imperial Palace was even more overwhelming. It was not just a building. It was a city within the city, sprawling across kilometers of carefully designed gardens and plazas. Guards in golden armor stood at every entrance. Officials in expensive clothes hurried through halls wide enough to fly a ship through. Kate felt completely out of place. She wore her best clothes, but they were still cheap and plain compared to what everyone else wore. People stared at her as she passed. She heard whispers. Why was someone like her in the palace? Who was she? What was happening? A senior aide met her at the entrance to the administrative wing. His name was Leonard Hayes, and he had worked in imperial government for 40 years. He looked Kate up and down with obvious disapproval. He did not say anything rude, but his expression said enough. "The Emperor has assigned you to work with the Office of Social Welfare," Leonard said stiffly. "I will show you to your quarters and then give you a tour of the department." Kate's quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms larger than the apartment she had shared with 3 other people. There was a bedroom, a sitting room, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, and a small kitchen. Windows looked out over the palace gardens. Kate stood in the middle of it all and felt like she was dreaming. "This cannot be right," she said. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake," Leonard replied. "These are the standard quarters for junior advisors." He checked his datapad. "You will receive a salary of 80,000 credits per year, plus benefits including full medical coverage. You will have access to the palace facilities, including the dining halls, libraries, and recreation centers." Kate did the math in her head. 80,000 credits was more than she had earned in the last 3 years combined. It was more money than she had imagined having. For a moment, she felt dizzy. The tour of the Office of Social Welfare was less impressive. It was a warren of offices filled with bureaucrats staring at computer screens. Everyone seemed busy, but Kate could not tell what they were actually doing. Reports were being written. Meetings were being held. Data was being analyzed. But none of it seemed to connect to actual people with actual problems. Her first meeting was a disaster. Kate sat at a large table with a dozen senior administrators. They discussed policy proposals for updating the food assistance program. The language they used was almost incomprehensible. Terms like means-tested eligibility thresholds and disbursement optimization protocols flew around the table. Finally, Kate could not take it anymore. She interrupted a man who was droning on about verification procedures. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice sounded small in the large room. Everyone turned to look at her. The man who had been speaking frowned. "Yes," he said impatiently. "I am sorry," Kate said, feeling her face flush. "But I do not understand what any of this means. Can you explain it in regular language?" The man sighed. "These are technical policy matters," he said in a condescending tone. "Perhaps you need more time to familiarize yourself with governmental procedures before participating in these discussions." Kate felt anger rise in her chest. It burned away her nervousness. "I understand more than you think," she said. "I know what it is like to be hungry. I know what it is like to need help. What I do not understand is why you need 40 pages of forms and 6 months of waiting just to give someone food." "The forms are necessary to prevent fraud," the administrator said stiffly. "But they also prevent people who really need help from getting it," Kate shot back. "By the time someone fills out all those forms and waits all that time, they might already be dead. Maybe instead of assuming everyone is trying to cheat, you should assume they need help and start from there." The room went silent. The administrator stared at her like she had just suggested burning down the palace. Then a voice came from the doorway. "She is right." Everyone turned. Emperor Kale stood in the entrance, his golden scales gleaming in the light. Nobody had heard him arrive. He walked into the room and sat at the head of the table. "Continue," he said to Kate. Kate took a deep breath. She had not known the Emperor was listening, but now that he was here, she decided to be completely honest. "These regulations sound good on paper," she said, "but in practice they make it almost impossible for regular people to get help. You have to prove you are poor, but proving it requires documents that poor people do not have. You have to wait for approval. But people who are hungry cannot wait months. The system is designed to keep people out, not let them in." The bureaucrats shifted uncomfortably, but Kale was nodding. "Go on," he said. Kate felt encouraged. "Back on New Haven," she said. There was a food bank run by volunteers. They did not ask for 40 forms. They just asked if you were hungry. If you said yes, they gave you food. It was simple, it worked. Why cannot the Empire do the same thing? Because, one of the administrators began, "We have to account for imperial funds and ensure proper oversight and maintain statistical accuracy." Or, Kate interrupted, "You could just feed hungry people and worry about the paperwork later." Kale stood up. Everyone else immediately stood as well. "From now on," he said, "Kate Morris will review all policy proposals before they are implemented. If she cannot understand them, they need to be rewritten. If she says they will not work in practice, we will change them. Is that clear? The administrators nodded, though many looked unhappy about it. Over the next few weeks, Kate was not alone. Kale brought in others like her from across the empire. There was a man named Greg Cooper who had worked in factories for 20 years before losing his job to automation. There was a woman named Lucy Stone who had raised 3 children alone while working 2 jobs. There was an elderly veteran named Paul Green who had spent years trying to navigate the imperial healthcare system. These people did not have fancy degrees or prestigious titles, but they had something the bureaucrats lacked. They knew what real life was like for ordinary citizens. They became advisors, consultants, and advocates. The established administrators resented them at first. There were complaints about unqualified amateurs interfering with serious work, but Kale supported his new advisors completely. When bureaucrats ignored their input, those bureaucrats found themselves reassigned to remote outposts. When governors complained about the changes, Kale personally visited their worlds and reminded them who was in charge. The reforms began to take effect. The updated minimum wage meant people could actually afford housing and food. The streamlined medical system reduced waiting times from years to weeks. New regulations prevented employers from exploiting workers. Housing subsidies made it possible for families to live in decent conditions. There was resistance, of course. Wealthy merchants complained about increased taxes. Factory owners protested labor regulations that cut into their profits. Some officials tried to slow down implementation, hoping the emperor would lose interest. But Kale did not lose interest. He visited worlds personally to check on progress. He audited corporations and imposed heavy fines on those who violated the new laws. He made examples of governors who failed to implement reforms. He made it clear that this was not a temporary initiative. This was the new direction of the empire, and everyone would follow it. Kate watched all of this with amazement. She had gone from stealing bread to survive to helping reshape an entire civilization. It still felt unreal sometimes. But every time she doubted herself, she thought about her brother Danny, now healthy and happy. She thought about her former co-workers at the diner, now running their own business and earning decent wages. She thought about all the people across the empire whose lives were getting better because someone finally listened to them. The empire was changing. And for the first time in a long time, Kate felt hope. 2 years had passed since that night in the Blue Star Diner. The Galactic Empire looked different now. The changes were not just in laws and regulations. They were in how people thought and what they expected from life. Citizens who had once accepted poverty as normal now demanded better and knew they had the right to do so. Kate Morris had become one of the most influential voices in the empire. She still did not have an impressive title. She was simply special advisor to the emperor. But when she spoke, people listened. Ministers and governors paid attention to her opinions. Bureaucrats learned to present their proposals in language she could understand. If Kate said something would not work, they went back and fixed it. She had changed too. She was no longer the thin, exhausted girl who had stolen bread to survive. She ate regular meals now. She slept in a comfortable bed. She wore nice clothes that actually fit, but she never forgot where she came from. She kept a small piece of bread in a glass case on her desk, a reminder of how far she had come and why her work mattered. Her brother Danny was thriving. The gene therapy had worked perfectly. He was 17 now, healthy and strong. He had just been accepted to university on the capital world to study medicine. He wanted to help other people the way his sister had helped him. Their parents had moved to the capital too. Her father worked as a consultant on labor issues. Her mother volunteered at a community center that helped poor families navigate government assistance programs. The Blue Star Diner was still operating on New Haven. Dale Price had declared bankruptcy shortly after being forced to pay fair wages. The building was now owned by a cooperative made up of the former employees. They served good food at reasonable prices while earning enough to live comfortably. The diner had become famous as the place where the emperor discovered the truth about his empire. Tourists visited to take pictures and hear stories from the workers. But the most important changes were happening across the entire empire. The statistics told the story. Poverty rates had dropped by 30%. More people were employed in jobs that paid living wages. Medical waiting lists had been cut from years to weeks. Crime rates had fallen as desperation decreased. Even economic productivity was up because well-fed, well-rested workers were more effective than exploited ones. The empire still had problems. 3,000 years of accumulated issues could not be fixed in 2 years. Some worlds were slow to implement the reforms. Some officials still tried to cheat the system. Some corporations looked for loopholes in the new regulations. But the overall direction was clear. Things were getting better. Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. It was evening, and the lights of millions of homes spread out below him like stars. Kate stood beside him reviewing reports on her datapad. Poverty rates dropped another 3% this quarter, she said. And the satisfaction surveys show people are generally happier with their lives. Good, Kale said. But we are not finished. We will never be finished, Kate replied with a slight smile. That is the whole point, is it not? You cannot just build a civilization and walk away. You have to keep working at it. Keep improving it. Keep adjusting as things change, Kale nodded slowly. In his 200 years of rule, he had sometimes thought of the empire as something fixed and permanent. A structure to be maintained rather than a living thing that needed constant care. Kate and the others had taught him differently. I was arrogant, he admitted. I thought that because I established good systems centuries ago, they would continue working forever. I did not realize that systems need constant attention. They can drift away from their original purpose if nobody is watching. You are watching now, Kate said quietly. We all are. That evening, Kale held a reception in the palace. But this was not the usual gathering of nobles and high officials. The guest list included factory workers and teachers, small business owners and artists, doctors and engineers and farmers. People from every level of society who had contributed to the empire's transformation filled the grand halls. They were nervous at first. These spaces were designed to impress and intimidate. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 3 stories high. Walls were decorated with priceless art. Servers in formal uniforms offered food and drinks. Most of the guests had never been anywhere so fancy, but gradually they relaxed. They realized they belonged here as much as anyone. These were the halls of power, and power was supposed to serve them. They began talking and laughing, sharing stories about how their lives had changed over the past 2 years. Kate found herself in conversation with a construction worker from a border world. His name was Victor Lane, and he had helped implement new safety regulations at building sites. Beside him was a teacher named Helen Price who had redesigned parts of the education curriculum to be more useful for students. We are all just regular people, Victor said, looking around at the grand hall. 2 years ago, none of us would have imagined being here. That is the point, Kate said. Regular people should have a voice in how the empire runs. We are the ones living under these laws. We should help make them. Kale addressed the gathering when everyone had arrived. His speech was brief and direct. He stood on a raised platform where everyone could see him, his golden scales reflecting the light. 2 years ago, he began, I was reminded of something I should never have forgotten. An empire is only as strong as its people. Not just the wealthy, not just the powerful, all its people. You have helped me remember that. More importantly, you have helped me build something better. He paused, his ancient eyes sweeping the room. The work continues, he said. There will be setbacks. There will be challenges. But I promise you this. Never again will this empire forget who it exists to serve. Never again will we allow our laws to benefit a few while abandoning everyone else. And never again will someone have to steal scraps of bread just to survive while working an honest job. The room erupted in applause. It was not the polite, measured clapping of formal court functions. It was genuine appreciation from people who had lived through hard times and seen them improve. Later, after most guests had left, Kate found herself alone with the Emperor again. They stood on the same balcony where they had talked earlier. Thank you, Kate said quietly. Not just for saving my brother, not just for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for caring enough to change things. Kale shook his head. Thank you for caring enough to show me what needed changing. You did not have to tell me your story that night. You could have just apologized and hoped I would not report you. But you were honest. And that honesty changed everything. I was just trying to survive, Kate said. Exactly, Kale replied. And the fact that survival required stealing food was the problem. The empire failed you long before you took that bread. He looked out over the city lights. You know, he said thoughtfully, in 3,000 years I have fought wars and conquered worlds and built monuments that will last forever. But this, what we have done these past 2 years, might be the most important thing I have ever accomplished, because it is not about power or glory. It is about making the empire mean something real to the people who live in it. Kate smiled. My mother used to say that the measure of a civilization is not its technology or its buildings. It is how it treats the people at the bottom. If they are treated well, everything else will be fine. Your mother is wise, Cale said. Perhaps she should join the government too. They both laughed. Then they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Kate felt something she had not experienced in years. Real, genuine hope. Not just for herself or her family, but for everyone. Hope that the empire would continue improving. Hope that it would become truly worthy of its citizens. The story of the Dragon Emperor and the starving waitress would be told for generations. Children would learn about it in school. Entertainers would dramatize it. Politicians would reference it in speeches. But the people who remembered it best were the ones who had lived through the changes. And in diners and restaurants across the empire, nobody went hungry anymore. Workers earned enough to live on. Leftover food was donated to community centers or taken home by staff. Anyone who tried to return to the old ways of exploitation found themselves facing both legal punishment and the anger of an entire civilization that refused to go backward. The empire had learned its lesson. True strength did not come from domination. It came from ensuring that everyone had a chance to thrive. And all it had taken was one young woman stealing bread and one ancient emperor willing to see what that really meant. The lights of the city glowed below them, millions of lives continuing in homes and workplaces across the capital world. Each of those lives was a little better now, a little safer, a little more hopeful, and that, Kate thought, was worth more than all the grand monuments and mighty starships in the galaxy. The empire had become what it was always supposed to be, a civilization that truly served its people, and it would stay that way, because now there were people watching to make sure it did.